and a current USC Trojan and author. His new book, unSEALed, is his guide to navigating life's transitions. In this conversation, we discuss why Mark decided to become a Navy SEAL, his experience in BUD/S, whether or not he considered quitting during the toughest military training in the world, leadership lessons from his time in the Navy, his first combat deployment in Iraq, and how bombs were his alarm clock, becoming an officer, spending time with the American legend Admiral James Stockdale. If you've never heard of him, you need to look him up. Why transitioning can be so difficult, how to effectively navigate life's transitions, and more. It was an honor to sit down with Mark. Here's our conversation. Mark, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely, Nolan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I actually saw you. I saw this is actually funny. So your thumbnail on Andy Stump's podcast is the reason that my thumbnails look the way they do.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I didn't even know that I hadn't heard about you or anything like that. I didn't even listen to the episode, frankly, until I saw you went on Tyler Geiger's Knock Performance podcast. Mm-hmm. And Tyler's a buddy of mine. So I was like, okay, I got to connect with this guy if Tyler's talking to him. And when did you go up to record the podcast with Andy by chance?
I think it was in January.
We might have just, I met Andy and had Leah on the podcast in Kalispell in January too. So we might have just missed each other.
Yeah. So I got there and you had to book the cab in advance.
Yeah.
So Uber didn't exist. And
Kalispell is a small town.
It's a small town, but it's a cool town. And I didn't know it was like a foodie town.
Yeah. Oh, the Black Rifle is the coolest coffee shop I've ever been in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it there. But yeah, I just thought that was funny so anybody who's listening, my thumbnails look the way they do because of your thumbnail on Andy's podcast. And I was like, this is probably the coolest thumbnail I've seen. So it's awesome.
Yeah. Andy's such a good guy.
Y'all's podcast was awesome. Incredible.
I haven't watched any of them yet. But for somebody to sit through 3 hours, we had like 100, I think we're at 126,000.
How does that feel?
I don't know. I don't have any frame of reference. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's
well. I can tell you, you're not going to get that many downloads from this podcast, unfortunately. But hope that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine, man. I'm meeting so many great people, and I just say yes to everything, and I've met some really incredible people. So I'm just going to
believe. What's that like? How many podcasts have you been on?
I think it's at 15 now.
Wow.
And I am scheduled to go on Mic Drop in May. And nice. Mike Ritland's an old, we're all about the same time frame. So I've known Big Mike since 1998.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It was cool to hear you and Andy talk about the growing up together in the teams. Really, that's a unique experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, and he's such a smart guy. And I saw that I embarrassed him when I told him he was smart.
Yeah, I was listening to it again today, and he clearly doesn't like being called that, I guess. I mean, but it sounds like you wouldn't have the career that he had without being an intelligent guy. That's for sure.
Yeah, and he just got it. He's just a really talented operator, and he just saw everything in a lot more advanced years than he was. I think he was 18.
That's great.
But he just figured it out, man, and he's better at BUD/S than I was. A little bit better.
Not too much.
Not too much. I mean,
well, I kind of want to start there. I mean, thinking about that, 18 years old is crazy because I'm thinking about myself as an 18-year-old. I'm 24 now, and I'm like, I don't see how you go through BUD/S as an 18-year-old. That's incredibly impressive. But for you specifically, you were 25, I think I remember you saying. What led you to the SEALs? What was it that was sort of the catalyst for that?
I had a pretty severe injury to my throwing shoulder. So in college, I played quarterback, and just took a really bad hit to my shoulder, and I should have had surgery on it, but 2 days after the injury, my buddy Jeff told me. He told me not to worry about anything. We're gonna go be Navy SEALs after the injury. So I decided not to go get shoulder surgery. So I went and talked to a doc, and he said, "Look, we can cut you open all the way from the top of your shoulder, pretty much to your armpit, and fillet you open, and hopefully it'll repair it, or it'll just heal on its own in about 3 or 4 years, and you should have full range of motion. So just based on that, just Jeff saying, "Hey, we're going to go be SEALs," and I saw the video and just saw how challenging it was going to be. I was like, I don't want to risk having a major surgery right before I want to complete this, what then became a life's dream. So yeah, so that was a catalyst. And
was that something you always wanted, or like did you sort of get that dream later in life when you were in college, or did you always envision yourself being a SEAL?
No, there was no information on the SEAL teams back then. This was 1991. So the video that I saw back in 1991 was the first time I'd ever heard about it. But my grandfather was in the Army, my dad is in the Air Force, so it was always a possibility to go into the military. But once I saw the SEAL stuff, I was just like, whoa, they make movies about these guys, and all I have to do is not quit. I was like, yeah, that's easy.
Yeah, I heard you say something about the fact that you just kind of had it ingrained when you were young, that just like if you started something,
Yeah.
like if you didn't start something, whatever, but if you started something, you were going to finish. Was that ingrained in you from a pretty young age?
Yeah, I was 9. I was getting ready to play. It was my first football practice. I think I was in 4th grade, and my dad, right when we show up at the practice field, he pulled me over to the side and said, "All right, we don't quit what we started around here." And I was like, yeah, Pop, I got it. And I was getting ready to take off, and he grabbed me by my shoulder and, he got down to my level and looked me in the eye and was like, once you start this thing, you're on a team now, and your teammates rely on you. So if you're a starter or you're riding the bench, once you start something, that's it. And I'd never seen my dad look at me like that. Like, hey, we don't play around with quitting around here. So that day is like burned into my psyche that, hey, once you start something, you can't quit. And sometimes in my later life, things I didn't want to do, I would start just so I wouldn't be able to quit.
That reminds me of a quote that it's the start that stops most people. So it's like once you start, you build a little bit of momentum, and then from there, like you said, it's literally just not quitting. You just keep going. Did you ever get like the urge, or was there ever any temptation to quit during buds? Because I've heard some people say like, no, it was never an option.
No, it wasn't an option. Once I was terrified every day, because you're always under the gun of either academically not making it, or your body just falling apart, or you're not making the times on the runs, swims, or all the evolutions for the day. So that was always an option. But as far as once I showed up at the center, January 2nd of 97, once I was there, like the quitting thing that went away. Because once I stepped on board the command, I was there to accomplish a mission. So just had to figure it out.
The proverbial burning of the ships. That really wasn't an option.
Yeah.
That's cool to hear, because I mean, I've never gone through any training like that or anything like that, but I feel like it might not even be possible to go like if you go into it thinking in your head like, oh, well, like we'll see, maybe I'll get through it. I feel like it's literally impossible to get through it. I feel like it has to not be an option.
Yeah, because it's so easy. The hardest thing about buds is how easy it is to quit. It's cold, you're miserable. The instructors are yelling at you. You always suck, right? And there's always something that says, you know what? There's something a lot easier than what I'm doing. So just given that option to quit, I think that's the hardest part of it.
Yeah, it's always right there.
Yeah.
You played quarterback at Miami of Ohio, you said?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have a good buddy who played at Miami of Ohio as well, actually. I'm curious, like, was there any lessons that you learned? Because I played college baseball as well, or college sports. Was there any lessons that you directly took from your college athletic experience to buds and SEALs, the SEAL teams in general?
It was the coaching. As much as the coaches are yelling at you and, seeing your potential, it was once I figured out that throughout all the yelling, just kind of zone out on the yelling. What message are they trying to convey? they want you to get better, and they want you to be a part of the team, and they want you to contribute to the team, and no matter what that capacity is. So when I got to Buds, as mean as the instructors were, and as challenging as the course was, at the end of the day, they were there to facilitate you graduating. If you wanted to be there, they were like, hey, if you want to be here, we'll make sure you stay. But they were also there to facilitate you leaving. If you want to leave, they're like, hey, bro, I got this. I got about 4 hours on my hands, so guess what you get. So, I mean, if they wanted you gone, you could be gone. But then once I had that experience with instructor Knowles when he was in a fit of rage, it seemed like. And I was like, look, Corey, I need to come in on Saturdays and practice swimming. He's like, what completely came out of his rage, and he looked at me and was like, yeah, man, Saturday 8:15, I'll see you then. And every Saturday I went and he taught me how to swim. And then there were, along the way, all the instructors were like, hey, instructor, I need help with this. All right, let's do it. And it's just those little bits of confidence building. And when I was in college, I learned how to play football for the first time. Because in high school, you're just kind of raw talent. And one day, Sean, the quarterback's coach, said, okay, got the scout team ready. And he's like, okay, we're going to run a play, and we're going to put this guy in motion, which is going to drop the cornerback in the zone. It's going to freeze the linebacker, and it's going to open up this space. So we're going to do play action, which is going to freeze the other linebacker. And right in the middle of the field, right over here to your left, is going to be this big void. And that's where you're going to throw your ball. So we did the whole thing and dropped back, and all of a sudden it was just like, oh, right? And
the golden light.
Yeah, and I was just like, holy crap, I just learned how to play football. And I took a sack because I was so shocked that it actually worked. So then I was just like, wow, okay, they see the potential and they want you to be here. And they're going to teach you how to excel at that level. And that's the same thing that happened at Buds. And I learned that lesson in playing college ball.
That's a valuable lesson, and I relate to that as well. Just like the different coaches I had in college, and my teammates, like the teammates that showed themselves to be coachable, like humble enough, like, hey, I really do want to get better at this. I want to learn.
Yeah.
And humble enough to not get caught up in the fits of rage that pretty much every college athlete is at the receiving end of. If you can really like humble yourself and say, you know what, I'm here to learn. This coach is trying to teach me something. He's not just doing this out of his own whatever. They do open up, and I think they treat you with a little bit more respect. And the follow-up question to that would be, did you have any people in your Buzz class that you remember sort of having that ego that didn't allow them to be coached, where the instructors were like, okay, it's going to be our mission to get this guy to quit?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised of the 166 guys who started the class. There were so many of them who just didn't get the team concept. And it's not hard if you play the sport. But the guys who had never played a sport, or they just had too much of an ego and they just couldn't figure out that, hey, why don't I just be quiet and just figure out how to work these team dynamics? So once the instructors, and every evolution at Buds mainly is a team evolution. So the people who can't organize themselves and just figure out team concepts and team dynamics, they stick out, and the instructor's like, oh, okay, that guy goes away, and you can just see him just hone in on this one guy. And
it's called the SEAL teams.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a statistic. It'd be interesting to see if there's a statistic out there of the people that have passed Buds and what percentage of them played team sports versus maybe individual sports or none at all.
Yeah, they do have those stats. And I think at the time when I was there, the best graduates rode crew. Yeah, it was one of the things you're like, I would have never saw that. But
strong. I bet you they're pretty strong. They're pretty
strong, but it's all 4 or 5 dudes just working together to figure out how to win. And but they do have those stats.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting. I might have to look that up. So you said 92 is when you joined? Or when
96.
96.
Yeah.
So that means you went through, well, first off, I really did love you and Andy's podcast. I thought it was so cool because you don't hear a lot of people that are retired from the military that have these experiences from so long ago together.
Yeah.
And I loved hearing about y'all's Bloods class. It sounds like y'all had a pretty infamously disliked Bloods class.
Man, it was so bad.
Why do you think that was?
It was a leadership issue. So the class was great, right? And we were just a bunch of knuckleheads just running around, and the instructors would say, "Hey, be here at a certain time and know where all your people are." So the majority of the class, we're just on autopilot. We're just, somebody's telling us where to go and we show up. But the leadership of the class, for some reason, couldn't figure out that very basic concept. So if you can't figure out the very basics from day one, and first phase is 8 or 9 weeks, and they just never figured it out. And the instructors were like, "All right, well, if you're not going to figure it out, then you're going to either quit or you're going to be the toughest dude in the history of Buds." And one of those guys was the toughest man I've ever seen, because going through all that, he still graduated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you said that, what's the number? Like 18 of y'all made it through from the original class or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
But that's normal, going through. And I think by the end of it, with the people who got recycled into different classes, I think probably around 30, 35 guys from the original class made it. So it's small numbers.
So, well, I think that's an important lesson right there. And just any team thing, it's usually a leadership problem most of the time. At least in my young experience in life, that seems to be the issue. So you went in 96. That means there was what, like 7 years of peacetime while you were in?
No, just 5.
5?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm bad at math. I'm not good at math. So 5 years pre 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
What was the difference like there? What like before 9/11, post 9/11? What was the difference in your time in the team?
So we were practicing for the old war. We were doing Vietnam era tactics, and like we were training for the jungle, because that's the last war we fought in. There were some skirmishes around, but other units had taken care of those because they were at a different tier level, like where Andy was. But on the regular special operations side, we didn't have any wartime tactics. So when we went over to Afghanistan for the first time, after the development group went over and didn't get their butts kicked, but it was like, okay, everything we've been doing for the last 20 plus years is wrong. And when they would come back, they would debrief at the major command, and then they would literally come to the other command and say, okay, everything we've been doing is wrong. We are changing this stuff today. So it went from Vietnam era to the mountains of Afghanistan, like right away. So all of our tactics changed, and that was the big difference. And just when it's actual combat, it's just different. There's more of a purpose, and every training evolution counts, and every round counts. So there was a stronger sense of urgency to get this right, and then when you get in down range, you're like, is this stuff really going to work? And when you get on target, it does. And so, but the op tempo increased probably tenfold, and everything tactically changed.
That's so interesting to hear. I've heard Jocko Willink, and like I don't want to like come across like I know anything about the military. I've never been in the military, but I've heard Jocko Willink say the Navy SEALs specifically, they don't have like the indoctrination of like say the Marines or conventional Army and stuff like that, just because the SEALs, the origins of the SEALs in Vietnam were so like adaptive, I guess. Yeah. So I've heard him talk about the fact that that's like one of the strong suits of the SEALs, which is cool to hear y'all come back and then immediately learn lessons, and then like there's no like 1,500 page document that has to be changed. It's like, hey, here's what we learned. We're going to implement it right away, which is cool to hear. Do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Oh yeah, I was deployed in Okinawa.
So you were deployed?
Yeah. So we were forward deployed, and we had these training exercises that we would do, and we were in our dorm room, and it was probably mid afternoon because they're about 18 hours ahead of us, and it was just like we thought it was. Initially, we thought it was one of the guys watching a movie, and then we quickly realized that it was live, and we had only seen the aftermath of the first plane crashing, and then we literally watched the second one crash. I'm like, okay, and then the phone started ringing, and it was like, okay, we're under attack, and you don't know any information. We just know that we're under attack and everything's about to change. So we are now a nation at war. So the full might of the military lit up right away.
And how did that, like, the energy in for you personally, but also for your whatever what you'd say unit or team that you were on?
Yeah.
Was it just like an immediate sense of like, okay, this is the real deal? Like, we need to.
Yeah, it's the real deal, but we were so young that we didn't understand how the military actually worked. So we thought that we were going to stop what we were doing and we were going to immediately go to Afghanistan and start fighting. But we had obligations through the military and through treaties and obligations that we had. So we had to stay and directly support the Pacific Theater commander, and our mission was to go down to Jakarta in Indonesia and prepare to rescue the members of the embassy down there. So we got on a ship and went down to Indonesia and back in the U.S. and deployed forces. They were trying to figure out who goes where, and people are jockeying for a position, and it's regional. So the Army's like, this is our region, and this is ours. And then the Navy's like, well, we have forces that need to go in, and the Air Force is like, everybody was just like, okay, we're getting in on the fight. How do we do this? And we just had the big military had to change all their op plans because they were prepping for the last war.
Yeah, that's interesting to think. As a civilian, I've never really thought about the politics that could be involved in that, and the different players that make those decisions. Because I mean, it's obviously the logistics of initiating a war or like a large scale, and I don't know what you'd call it, invasion or something like that. But like that's got to be insane to even comprehend.
Well, it is, but historically, the U.S. has been incredible at logistics. We can get stuff anywhere within a very short amount of time. So when we already had all the systems in place, they were just focused somewhere else, right? So then it was like, okay, we have all this focus, and then they have the redundancies in the background. It's like, okay, we still need to complete our obligations where, as if we're not at war, but the forces that are going to war, they completely changed and ramped up, and people and bullets and bombs and all that stuff was like, all right, we're focusing on this right now. It took about a month to get all the logistics and the country clearances and all that stuff. And then once those were in place, it was like, okay, we get stuff in country, and now we go fight.
And so you were out in Okinawa, you come home. Did you ever get deployed to either Iraq or Afghanistan?
Yeah. So I came back from that deployment, put in for a commission to become an officer, went to officer candidate school. But prior to that, I was a sniper instructor. So those obligations, like I said, those obligations still existed. So we still had to produce SEALs, and we still had to produce snipers, and we still had to produce all that stuff while people were going forward deployed. So as I was preparing to get accepted for a commission, I was teaching the sniper school for about a year. And then I got accepted, went down to Pensacola in, I think, October. Had my commission in January of 2004 and showed up at SEAL Team 8. And we had a shortened up workup. And then all of a sudden, in, I think it was October of 2004, we had just touched down in Iraq, and we're getting our orders to go fight that war over there. So it was crazy. But
would that be considered peak war in Iraq, or? or when would that have been considered?
I think 2003 to 2007, I think, was the peak, because we had shifted colors from just fighting the war in Afghanistan, and then it shifted to Iraq. So then we're fighting two separate fronts. So the initial push in Iraq, once we took it, it was pretty calm, and then the foreign fighters showed up, and then it was just absolute mayhem.
Really?
Yeah, it was just absolute chaos. So I think those 2003 to 2007, I think, were the peak years.
And is that just because the foreign fighters were better trained, better equipped, things like that, or why do you think it hit such an uptick?
They just came in to fight. Like, they came from all over the world to just kill Americans, and that's when they brought in IEDs, and then they had studied our tactics, so they knew how we would respond. So just the skill set of the fighters and the determination of the fighters was different than the locals, and you could tell when people from Afghanistan were coming in, or from all around the world, they were coming in just to fight and kill Americans.
And what was that like over just being over there, like that experience? That's obviously such a only so many people have had that experience of being in an active war zone and really a part of the fight. So what was that like?
Well, my alarm clock every morning was a IED going off. So they would have morning prayers, and then you'd hear this huge or feel a huge explosion. The first time I heard it, I jumped out of my bed, and we were doing a turnover, I think with SEAL Team 5, and they just slept right through it. And I was like, what in the world's going on? So, that was my first alarm clock. So I went into the command center, and I thought the bomb went off right outside of my tent. And we looked at the explosion. It was like 8 miles away.
That's how big it was.
That's how big it was.
And so that's welcome to Iraq.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I was saying good morning. So that was my alarm clock every morning. So I'd hear the explosion, and after a while, I would just kind of check myself, and was like, okay, that was, and you could tell how far away they were. So after a while, I was like, man, that felt close. It felt like about 2 miles away. So I'd go into the command center. Hey, what bomb went off at 8:07? And it was 4 miles away. So you could tell how. And then bullets were flying everywhere, and rockets were coming in on the base, and you just kind of settled in, and just kind of life went on as normal.
You turned into the SEAL Team 5 guys were just sleeping through it.
Yeah. And then when the new guys would come in, the explosion would go off, and you're just like, these new guys are here. And it's like, hey, you guys are all right. That was like 6 miles away. You're good. And you just kind of figure it out.
Do you have any stories or experiences on that deployment that really stick out to you?
Yeah, that was the first time. So we did a lot of sniper work over there. And my first op, we went out and we were hunting this group of guys who were terrorizing the locals. And we were in our sniper hide, and we were dug in, and all of a sudden, I thought I was dreaming, but I see these little heads bobbing, and I looked and I was like, anybody see that over to the right at 11 o'clock or at 2 o'clock? And like, no, I don't see anything. Well, no kidding, it was this goat herder, and his goats were just running down the hill, and they were eating all of our vegetation right around us. So this guy was with his wife, and we were so dug in, like we couldn't, our sniper rifles were useless because he was like 6 feet away. So we all had our pistols out ready to shoot this guy if he happened to look over. And he looked right in the bush, didn't even notice us.
Wow.
But he had 6 pistols, right on his chest because we couldn't get compromised. And I was just like, what in the hell just happened? And he just took off. And then we actually went into an urban environment. So as a sniper, when you go into an urban environment, normally when you train, you have, you know what the distances are, and you know what the wind's doing. But when you're in an urban environment, the wind and the conditions are completely different. The wind's pushing through all different sectors of the city. So all the static training that you had in like a calm environment went away. So as targets start coming up, as we're prepping, we're like, okay, what's the wind doing at 200 yards? And what's the wind doing at 400 yards? So we build what's called a range card, and we pretty much make a drawing of the battle space, and where we think targets are going to most likely show up, we range those, and then so if a target comes out at 11 o'clock, and it's 200 yards away, I know what that distance is, so I know what my hold's going to be. So, but you don't have any indicators, like there are no flags and there's no trees or anything. So what you'd have to do is look down at the ground and look at the mirage. And if there's no wind, the mirage is doing what's called a boil. So the mirage is coming straight up like this. But if the wind is blowing, it actually pushes the mirage over. And we had a calculation, like if the mirage gets pushed over by 30 degrees, it's a 15-mile-an-hour wind. So that's my indicator. So now I know which way the wind's coming. So I know where my target is. I know what the prevailing wind condition is. So now I know where my shots are going to go.
Yeah, that's something I've also never thought about, just the difference between like a more open, natural landscape as opposed to a city where there's like buildings and wind can block off and go down different alleyways and whatnot. That definitely sounds a lot more, maybe not a lot more complicated, but different. But you brought up something that you just said, to have somebody like literally just look at you and like not even know you're there. So that's a part of what makes a sniper so, or at least like in your position, that's like part of your job, right? Is creating the camouflage and things like that.
Yeah.
And is there like, do you go to school for that, or like is that just in sniper school, or how do you get good at making yourself not noticeable?
So yeah, so sniper school is a 10-week course. So we were taught the Vietnam era jungle sniper stuff. So you get your qualification, you're a qualified SEAL sniper, or you're a qualified sniper after that 10-week course. But then you have advanced courses in urban sniper, and then weird positions and cold calls and cold bore shots. So you really are a well-rounded shooter. So by the time you get in country, now it's just in the margins. You just have to learn the new environment. But that 10-week course was just brutal. It's a brutal course.
So you go to Iraq, and how long were the deployments then?
Navy deployments are always 6 months. They could get extended for sometimes up to a year, but that's rare. But the Army, they deployed for a year.
That's wild. That's a long time.
Yeah. So Marines are 6 months, Navy 6 months, Air Force between 4 months and 8 months. But the Army's they're in place for a year.
Well, that brings up another question. What was it like working with the other branches?
We didn't really cross-pollinate that much, because General McChrystal really said, "Hey, you guys got to work together on this whole thing." So we were starting to figure out the whole joint process, but the Army Special Forces mission is completely different than ours, and ours is different than the Tier 1 units, and the Tier 1's units are different than the Air Force Special Operations guys, and the Marine Corps was just coming on board with their Special Operations. So everybody was just in their own little silo. We could work together and exchange information and intel, but as far as embedding with each other, that was rare because the tactics were completely different. So we would embed Air Force JTACs, Joint Air Controllers, Joint Tactical Air Control. So they would call in airstrikes, and that's all they did, and they were great at it. We would have EOD. We would incorporate explosive ordnance disposal into some of the targets. So on a tactical level, it was a little bit, but as the wars progressed and we got better at working together, we would cross train. But going on target, it was just it wasn't really conducive because we would have to actually train with the Army and figure out what their tactics are. And if you get into a gunfight and then revert back to your Navy tactics, it could just completely ruin the target. So while I was in, we didn't really cross-pollinate like that, but as the wars progressed, we did.
Yeah, that makes sense though, because you talk about logistics and different training protocols and tactics and even like hierarchies and just protocols in general. It makes
Yeah.
sense that you would want to sort of not isolate, but it makes sense that you'd want to keep from at a tactical perspective, like actually going to a target. It makes sense that you'd want to keep the people that have trained together for X amount of months and gone through the same pipelines in the same environment and all that. But so when you so 6 months in Iraq, obviously your first time at war, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, did you change? Like, did you? I mean, I'm sure you did. But like, how did you change when you came back? Were you noticeably different in any way?
Yeah, you're like emotionally detached almost completely. You know, when a car bomb going off or rockets coming in, or you could lose your life at any moment, you just kind of disconnect and just kind of go on autopilot. And look, intel comes in, target package comes in, we go out, and we could get shot on target. So you really, or you could be driving down Route Irish, and you know multiple car bombs go off. So you're like, okay, this could be my last time going out. So you just kind of get numb. So that numbness comes back. It follows you home, and you try to reconnect with your family, and then the workup starts again, and then that churn starts again, and you can kind of connect, but then as the workup progresses, things get more intense and more lifelike, and what you're going to see in combat. So then you kind of have to disconnect again, and then you're prepping to go on deployment. So it's another level of disconnecting, and then when you show up back in theater for your second or third time, you're just like, okay, I'm good. But you really just have to detach from like the emotional side of life. And it's just all business and all prepping. And is my gear the right way? Is everybody going to come home? Um, so yeah, you're going to war, you know.
Yeah, that push and pull, like the push and pull of coming back and then workups, and that seems to me like it would be one of the most difficult things to do in the military.
Um, well, that's the job, though. You know what you're getting into, and you know what the cycle's going to be. So, you start your workup again, and you're with 16 different guys, or sometimes eight different guys, because the new guys come in, and some people come and go. But you often keep a core group of guys, and then you're just around your boys again, and it's that locker room, and we're all getting to know each other and learning new stuff, and you really have to bond with those 16 to 20 guys, and so that part's fun. Um, you're training at incredibly high levels, and you're just watching your team progress, and people are getting better, and then by the time you're all done, you're like, okay, yeah, we're chomping at the bit to go. We're done practicing. Let's go down range.
Yeah, it's like a preseason almost.
Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned something earlier, and you talked about it with Andy. So when you got I understand that you have a pretty interesting way that you got your your officer package sent in through
Yeah.
Admiral Stockdale. Can you talk about that a little bit? That's pretty crazy.
That guy, for what he'd been through, being a prisoner of war for almost a decade, and just the atrocities that he went through. When I met that guy, he was the nicest guy I'd ever met. Just a sweetheart of a guy. And I flunked out of college, so the first thing I wanted to let the admiral know is that, hey, sir, I flunked out of college. And he was like, I don't want to hear that shit. And he was like, your peers have said you deserve to be here. You deserve to, go on to be an officer. So it's like, I don't want to hear that I flunked out of school stuff. Who cares? Now, looking forward, you're going to be a naval officer. So let's make sure that your peers have already said that you're ready. So now you're just at the tail end of it and getting endorsements. And he's like, I'm going to listen to the people who work with you and have endorsed you. So yeah, shut up. Let's go. But after that, very stern talking to, it was just hanging out with a military legend for 4 hours. for the first time. And then for the second time, like I said, I 8 o'clock the next morning got a phone call, and hey son, where are you? I was like, sir, I'm on my way. And I had known he's starting to suffer from dementia. So once I got the phone call, he was adamant. I was like, hey, I'm waiting on you. I was like, yes, sir, I'm on my way. Sorry, I got caught up. Got dressed and went back to the house for the interview for the second time.
And that's not something you say no to when a guy like Admiral Stockdale calls you back. You're like, yep, all right, on the way.
Yeah, I didn't even hesitate. I was like, yes, sir, I'm on my way.
So did you learn anything from that? Because one thing that I've been fascinated by throughout my life is just POWs in general. And like the lesson that I've taken is the fact, like him and like Louis Zamperini and people that you hear about, specifically in like the Vietnamese POW camps, like how they can go through that, like you said, just immense amount of tragedy, just more rougher conditions than most humans can even comprehend probably, and then come out of it and be like Admiral Stockdale and be like a joyous human being.
Yeah.
It's incredible that can happen. Did you learn any lessons like talking to him and being able to hang out with him?
He just anchored himself onto his family. He always had hope. And, it really, I listened to him talking about his wife, and I'd read his book prior to meeting him, and, how his kids, and just that, hey, I'm going to get home. I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to be reunited with my family. It really made me focus on my family and my brand new daughter. So that was the best takeaway I'd had, and we just had a son, so I was like, okay, this is what's important. Being a SEAL is great, being an officer is great. Getting ready to go, into combat was what you trained for, it's what you joined for. But at the end of the day, it's your family. That's your legacy, and everything in his house, so much of his life story and what kept him going was just hope and his family. And so I just really refocused on what was important.
Did it hit you at the time that you were going over to his house to spend time with him, how surreal it was? Like that, how special of a human that is, and you're getting to go not hang out, but you're getting to go spend time with him?
I didn't appreciate it because I was going over this like, okay, I need to get this signature, which is one step in a few that I have left to become an officer. And I didn't appreciate it until I'm glad he called me back the next day, because I got to appreciate the stories, and I got to appreciate just how kind and humble of a man he was. So had I not had that second one, I don't think I would have been as appreciative. But after the second one, I just kind of sat back and was like, you're a pretty cool guy, and had a great laugh. And he gave me a mission after the second one. He's like, all right, Mark, this is what we're going to do. When you meet Johnny, you let him know you hang with the big boys now. He'll know what you mean. And I was like, yes, sir. Who's Johnny? He's like, Johnny Stockdale, damn it. Or no, Johnny McCain. Johnny McCain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they were POWs together and had been great friends. So I couldn't get on Senator McCain's calendar and let him know that, hey, and this was after Admiral Stockdale had passed. So it would have been like, hey, sir, you don't know who I am, but I met the Admiral, and he told me that I hang with the big boys now. And I just wanted to see Admiral or Senator McCain like light up, like, I know what that means.
Like an old buddy.
But but I never got to get on his calendar before he passed. So that's one of those things I wish I would have had the time to do, is to get up to his office and talk with him. But it was a great experience,
Yeah, that's a unique way to enter the officer part of your life. Yeah.
And but I met so many great people throughout my time in the teams and even afterwards. But his was the most special.
The name of your book is unSEALed, a Navy SEAL's Guide to Mastering Life's Transitions. which I think that's a great title, first off. And as I mentioned, I played college baseball, and I don't want to even come close to comparing the transition from baseball to non-baseball or to military to civilian. But I will say, transitioning from anything, because I wanted to play pro baseball my whole life. Like that's like literally what I like. It was my dream. I worked real hard at it. It just didn't come to fruition. And the transition, I mean, I'm 24 now, so it's been over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been tough. There's been like just a series of challenges in that transition. So I'm curious, like, what lessons have you learned from your transition? Because you spent 20 years in the Navy, correct?
Yeah, 20 years,
Yeah. So what lessons have you learned about the transitions of life from your transition from the SEALs to civilian life?
Well, I've learned now that even though our experiences are completely different, I bet you started playing baseball at what, 5, 6?
4 or 5.
Yeah. Thousands upon thousands of hours, thousands of games, thousands of ups and downs. I would say that my transition from sports, because I started at 9, that was as hard or as challenging because you don't have your teammates anymore. You don't have that sport anymore. You don't have that thing that you're striving towards, and you don't have that locker room anymore. So I would say, and the reason I wrote this book and I had so many different transition points because they're all different, but they're all challenging. Like, I think you playing baseball for 18 years is almost my entire Navy career, right? So I think your transition was equally as challenging as mine by far.
Yeah, and that's a great point.
Yeah, so I would not categorize it as less than, because I think it's equal to. It was just a different environment, right? But you still had teammates, you still had practice, you still had obligations, you were still thriving to get better every day to try to reach your goal of playing in the bigs. And once that career is over, you're mourning the loss of that sport that you were completely in love with, ups and downs, but you love baseball and you still do. Yeah, I would not say that my transition was any less challenging than yours or anybody who plays sport.
Yeah, I've never actually really thought about it that way. That's a good point. I've never actually thought about the fact that it was like 18 years of my life or 16, 17 years of my life. That you're exactly right. It was like thousands of hours, thousands of games, teammates, practices, all that stuff. And so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, just think of it. It was 80% of your life was baseball.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big loss.
Well, that being the case, like that being said, transitions being transitions, whatever they're coming from. Mm-hmm. What helped you get through the challenges that I'm sure you faced transitioning from the military? I
got the best job of all time at the University of Southern California, and USC is a cult. We know it. We get it, right? But I talk about loss of identity and loss of tribe and kind of loss of mission and purpose. But when I got on campus, it was like, hey, you're here. You're now part of the tribe. I was like, okay. And they didn't care that I wasn't a graduate. I was just on campus. Like, hey, we love having you here. And I got to enjoy the college experience from all my life's experience. And it's like, okay, now I appreciate the college band playing in the background or students flying around all over the place, just the energy of the place. And I had a mission again because I was joining this university, and the university had a mission, and I was a small piece of it, but I was very important to it. I was like, okay, now I have a mission again. And then I decided I wanted to be a Trojan forever. So I, enrolled in grad school again. And then I was like, okay, I'm part of something again. So I think that was the anchor that really kept me focused, and you're valuable still. You're just valuable in a different way to a different group of people, but just as valuable. So that's really what it was. I found my tribe. So if at all possible, I think that what happens with a lot of people who are transitioning, especially from the military or even from sports, you're always part of a team, right? There's always a core group of people driving towards the same mission, be it win a little league championship, win the states, or get a national championship in college or in the bigs. You're always driving towards a goal, a huge goal in a lot of senses. And, that's taken away from you either through injury or, you weren't picked up, or for whatever reason you have been retired from whatever you were doing. And it's hard. You're mourning the law. I was mourning the loss of being a SEAL and that meaning something, as I'm sure you were, missing the life of putting your baseball hat on and warming up and putting the pinstripes on, strapping up and going to your battlefield, right? And so there's a mourning process to that, and our individual muscles have atrophied. Your team muscles are really strong, but now all of a sudden you're probably trying to say to yourself, "Oh, I can do this on my own," and you'll be able to get those muscles back. But just realize and give yourself some time and grace to say, "I'm not good at this individual thing yet anymore." I still, there are aspects of it that you now have to focus on, but those muscles have atrophied, and you're not going to be good at doing things on your own again. I haven't done anything on my own for 40-something years.
Yeah.
Just haven't.
Well, I think that's probably why I love what you just said about the USC thing. Like you found your new tribe and your new mission. You found, which a derivative of those two is purpose. So you essentially found your new purpose, which is certainly what I was struggling with for a while. I'm starting to really pick up some momentum in that area, but that's actually why I started the podcast, funny enough. So it's called the Tyro experience, and Tyro means novice or beginner. And it stems from the Latin word meaning young soldier. Yeah. And so I had a conversation with my mom because I was like, I don't know what I want to do for work. I don't know what blah, blah, blah. I played baseball for this long. This is what I'm good at. I'm interested in so many things. And she's like, why don't you just start talking to people? And so that's really the impetus of the podcast, was to try to talk to people so I could learn about what they do, and maybe it'll rub off on me, and I'll find my avenue that way. Yeah. So I love what you just said about the like finding your new tribe and your new mission and new purpose, and how that can revitalize you, especially if you're coming from that team perspective, like you said.
Yeah. And I found it at USC, and it was awesome. I had an awesome time. And graduating from USC was probably up there with some of my greatest accomplishments, becoming a father, graduating Buzz, getting my trident. But the day that they're like, hey, you're now a USC graduate, I was just like, this is the best thing ever, and I was so proud of that accomplishment because, USC is hard, man. The place sucks as far as academics go. That place is tough. And, having flunked out of college for the first time, I was like, man, there's always that anchor on you. It's like, man, I failed at something. So when I finished my undergrad, and then I got my MBA through the Naval Postgraduate School, it was worth going back to get a second master's just to be part of this new tribe for good.
That's awesome. What's your goal for the book? Like what's your like perfect vision for unSEALed?
I want to, on a micro level, I want veterans to understand that, hey, I was at a really high level in the military, and I struggled with transition, right? And you have the skills to thrive again outside of the military. You just need to figure that process out again. And the goal was, I had heard that there are 20 to 22 veterans a day were taking their own lives. And the goal is just to cut into that and say, please don't take a permanent solution to what is often a temporary problem. And that's on the micro level. But then on the macro level, I want people like you to reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling with sports, or I was an entrepreneur and I sold my company and now I don't have any purpose, or I'm just becoming a father. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Or there's so many transitions in life, and then transitioning from junior high to high school to college. All those are transition points, and transitioning from college to the real world and working for a living, doing something other than what you planned on doing while you were in college. And just to reach all those individuals who are transitioning is like, hey, okay, I have all the skills. I just need to figure out what's next. But also just to say, hey, you're not alone in this transition process. Everybody goes through it. Literally everybody goes through transitions at some point. And as I was writing the book, I realized, I was like, man, I've had a bunch of different transition points. So why don't I capture those, and not saying that, hey, I was a Navy SEAL and do what I do and you're going to transition well. It's like, okay, yeah, I had some high points and then I had some low points, and that's all part of that transition journey. And I hope that either a service member reads the book and says, okay, I resonate with that, or more importantly, a spouse or a child sees the book and reads it and says, hey, dad, mom, I just read this book and this story is exactly what you're going through. Why don't you read it? So that's really the goal. It's just reach out to people who might be struggling with transition and get the help you need, because the help's out there, and you just have to open your aperture to what's actually available to you, as opposed to this pinpoint, I'm in the military, I'm doing this military mission, okay, or I'm an athlete, I'm doing this thing, or I'm a student and I'm doing this thing. They're just transition points throughout life, and I just want it to be as broad a stroke as I could make it, so everybody so it touches multiple transition points.
That's awesome. That's a worthy mission in my book, and I think you're doing a cool thing, like coming on podcasts like mine and Tyler's and Andy's. It's cool to hear you speak about that, because like all transitions are the same, but like we were talking about, you were in the military at a very, very high level for a very long time.
Yeah.
So that's a serious transition. It's not just like, it's not as, what's the word? Inconsequential as some other transitions. So it's cool to see you have that mission. And I think one thing that I love about what Andy always says about being in the SEALs, he always says like his old job. And it's like it's just kind of not lackluster, but he doesn't want to identify with that former self, which I think is a good way to help. At least that's what I've done. It's like I'm no longer a college baseball player. I'm no longer a baseball player. It's like that's what I used to do. Right. So I don't know if you relate to that at all.
Yeah, like I used to be a SEAL. Right, I'm more a Trojan now than a SEAL. Yeah. I rock my USC gear all the time, and my kids make fun of me. But I was like, hey, you can't make fun of your dad, so shut up. But that was an incredibly impactful chapter of my life. But that chapter's over. I'm never going to be a SEAL again. Nobody's going to say, hey, Mark, we need your skills. We need your skills again. So that's awesome. I'm a former SEAL, and I'm okay with that. And it's made for a great career and cool stories. It really changed my life, and for the better. But I'm not a SEAL anymore.
It's like that acceptance of the fact that it's former is kind of what allows you to transition into the next thing. Like for you, USC, that's I think that might be like the most powerful thing I've heard in this conversation is right there. Like, I'm okay with that. I'm a former SEAL and I'm okay with that.
Yep. I'm 100% like, I don't have any SEAL stuff back here. Not really. Yeah, I don't have any SEAL stuff. It's like I have some stuff dedicated. I have some small trinkets that are meaningful, but I gave most of those to my son.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That'd be a cool gift.
Yeah. So I pass that on to him, and if he wants to go into the military, or if he wants to play sports, or he wants to know what transitions are like, it's like, hey son, have a seat, and I'll tell you all about it.
And read this book.
And read your dad's book.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're pushing that hour mark.
Oh wow!
I can't thank you enough, man. I really appreciate your time. This has been an awesome conversation. I feel grateful that I got to sit down with you and chat for an hour.
Absolutely, I'm grateful for the invite, and I really appreciate you inviting me on the show. And now you're in Austin, right? Are you a Hook'em Horns guy?
No, ironically, I went to Virginia Tech, but both my parents went to A&M, so I'm an Aggie.
Ah, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Talk about a cult. It's very similar to
Yeah.
it's very similar to USC in that way.
Well, if I'm in Austin, I will definitely reach out to you because I'll be in Dallas